Hello, this is the second attempt at me to do a sort of TEDx style presentation. The first one I failed for my assessment because it was over 3-4 minutes long. This time I'm timing it. Again, I'm not going to use a script, and I'm just going to talk. And just to keep it short, I'm going to start by talking about this wonderful book here. It was published in the 1940s by Ladybird, and there was a whole set of the books that they became Start About Books, Starting School, and Talk About Books. And these series of books were for parents to read and help read with their children before they started school. So it was children learning to read. And the interesting thing I find about these books is that the way they present the primary school. What is this image that they're presenting to these young children before they go? So let's have a look. We should read Going to School. We go into school. So it's an image of them entering school. We take off our coats and hats. We go into our classroom. We tidy the nature table. So there's a lovely image of two children sorting out the labels for some twigs from a tree, and they've got a fish tank that they're looking after, and there's loads of different wildflowers. This image of the children learning through what they've collected on their rambles or on the school walks, and learning directly from nature. It's a very powerful image for the primary school in the 1940s, but it was an image, like all the other pages in this book, that we can take back to 1914 and the birth of the community calling themselves New Ideals in Education. Their first conference in 1914, but it was actually for the Montessori Society, 50 members of which attended, including the founder who hosted the conference. There were 250 people in all, from all over the country. Clara Grant, the famous East London teacher, was there, and she went to 2 further conferences. And it was actually called the Montessori Conference. And Montessori sent a telegram wishing them well and supporting their values of liberating the child. And most of the talks were on Montessori in the primary school, Montessori in the secondary school. But other talks were by teachers that had already been experimenting with liberating the child and with the child-centered learning. So there was Norman McMahon, who was a teacher who ran a democratic classroom that allowed the children to make decisions about what they were learning and for them to learn together as groups. And he'd written a book called Pathway to Freedom about his methods that was published that year. And he starts his talk off by saying, "I feel like a sailor, a shipwrecked sailor who has finally reached land." He totally welcomed the community and the fact that now he had people who shared his values and his attempts at trying to reform the school system such that the child was at the centre, and it was about the child developing into an individual who was an active member of their community, who could follow their own learning, follow their own inquiry, do their own research, and learn with the help of the adults rather than the traditionalist view of authoritarian learning. So every page of this book can be seen to symbolise the values of that community in 1914. In 1915 they called themselves New Ideals in Education, and Sir Percy Nunn, who was to become the first director of the Institute of Education, he sort of created the phrase liberating the child in the school, a phrase that was used to introduce every conference, so that people at the conference, teachers, professors, inspectors, musicians, composers, artists, politicians, they would all know the shared starting point for what they wanted to do with their schools. So let's have another look at this book. So they tidied the nature table. We give the flowers some watering, so they're watering the flowers that are around the room. I mean, it's interesting that Margaret Macmillan in her work in East London, and Clara Grant as well, they were very specific in trying to create an environment of nature and beauty that surrounded the children that they were looking after. So they would have beautiful pictures in the corridors. They would ensure that there were gardens with flowers, so that the children would learn to would be able to respond to the beauty of nature. We feed the hamster. So the idea of looking after pets and animals and caring for them. There was John Arrowsmith, who and many others like him. He set up a school in Yorkshire, which was based on learning through all the senses, and a very specific part of it for him was to do with sex education and caring and looking after animals. And here we have the children looking after a hamster. We say our prayers. So as a community sharing a religious experience. Then we write our news, and there they are at their desks writing what they've done during the week or the day. And there's a wonderful map of how they get to school and what is on the way. We read in the book corner. So the idea that different parts of the classroom are for different activities, and they can go and they read in the book corner by themselves without the adult. We measure and we weigh. So she's weighing and counting beans, and the little boy is being measured, his height is being measured. And next to him is a poster saying we can write our names with the names of the individual children. We buy things at the shop. And here we have a young girl selling a windmill to a boy and a girl. And we have in the background the price. The windmills are 9p each. And everything is made by the children. There are crowns and swords and aeroplanes and boats, all made from cardboard or from materials that they found. The dolls are 4p, boats are 3p. This reminds me of Clara Grant and her farthing bundle, where she didn't run a shop, but she would create toys and make toys for the children, or have other children make toys that could then be given as presents, as surprise presents to the children once a week as they queued up for their farthing bundle. But it also was, in New Ideals in Education, the French ran co-ops. They had a whole movement of schools where the children would create their own books and learn printing, and they'd have their own printing presses and binding, and then they would sell these as a cooperative, and the money would then be used to help develop something within the village school. But the important thing for the teachers was that the children were not only learning a craft, but were also learning about commerce and about cooperatively working together and then sharing the money, the profit that they made. Then we have our milk. The important thing with New Ideals and with the teachers like Margaret Macmillan and Clara Grant and many others was the health and welfare of the child. And this was integral to their schools and their education. So they set up health centres within the schools or linked to the schools. We play in the playground. So playground is very, very important. Outside, they're climbing over apparatus. They're playing games with each other. They're skipping. They're playing Ring a Roses. And it just reminds me of going further back than New Ideals, but it was part of the New Ideals. But if we think about Richard Owen, the great cooperator who set up a school in his community of New Lanark, and one of the prime things of his school, as he said, was the playground, and the rule of the playground was to be happy and to help others to be happy. And I love the fact that when he writes it, he deliberately talks about not employing teachers for the children, but employing adults who love children. Remember, this was 1817 when he wrote. And then they take off their frocks and shirts, and we change our shoes. So they're getting ready for their PE and for their creativity. We dance to the music. There's the teacher and the piano playing, and the children dancing with their hands in the air. We sing our songs. Now they've gathered around the piano and they're singing together. Then we wash our hands. so that we have dinner together. And there they are eating together. It was very important about food and about eating, and it's still going on, isn't it, where teachers in England are campaigning and others for children to have full breakfast. And there was a big campaign. I remember Alexander Bloom was reported in 1945 to 55. One of his campaigns was to get the impoverished families of the children he was teaching to accept the free school meals. His was the most democratic state school in England at the time. It was called St George's in the East, and his school totally reflects the values of New Ideals. And the inspectors, the inspectors were heavily involved in New Ideals. The chief inspector of schools was one of the founders of this community, Edmund Holmes. And the conferences would have up to 8 or 9 inspectors for London, inspectors for music, inspectors for art, and they would not only be there to listen and to learn, but they would be presenting as well. So it's a bit sad, isn't it? I mean, how many conferences have you been to when inspectors have actually been part of the presentation about creativity, learning and citizenship and activity and children enjoying learning? And after dinner we paint, and there they are painting in different colours, painting a van and a house. We make things with wood, and there they are hammering with a woodwork table and saws. We make things with clay, and here it just reminds me again of Clara Grant in East London, where she would get the children to make toys and make things out of clay that they would then use to tell stories. So they would make, like the 3 little bears, a table with 3 chairs and bowls for the soup, for the porridge, and the children or the teacher can retell the story or act it out. And they would make models of the park, and they would make models that they could play with in terms of imaginative, creative games. Then the children tidy their classroom, and at the very end there they are listening to a story. It's great because the other books not only have the children ending the school by listening to the story, they have the children going home and sharing their story and retelling it to their parents. Then they put on our coats and hats and they go home. So this is a gorgeous image of the primary school, and it is an image of the typical primary school in the sense that this was an image given to any child in this country before attending school. Just imagine what it would be like now, today. What kind of book would they write? Would they mention SATs? Would they mention exams? Would they mention learning through tests? Would they mention measurement? Here we have a celebration of creativity, of making, of doing, and in one of the books it starts, the first thing is making friends, and actually being a community within the school. And this is why I think that we need to regain this history, to remind ourselves and to use it as a motivating factor to celebrate these men and women from the New Ideals and the schools they helped create. They created, the New Ideals helped create the idea of a good primary school as portrayed in this book. And they did it during the war. They started before the war, and they saw it as one way of creating a society and a world of peace without war, in which young people would be active learners, inquirers, working together and actively being part of all the communities in which they're members of. Thank you.